Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Like Nice Lady said, I'm Jeremy Fooster. I cover box office and Hollywood labor. And Hollywood labor is what we're going to talk about today because AI is really affecting the Hollywood labor front for all the unions. But today we're going to focus specifically on actors with Jeff Bennett, who is general counsel for SAG-AFTRA, and AI has completely consumed your life, I believe, right?
Yes, it has.
Well, let's start with this. So obviously AI was a big factor of last year's SAG-AFTRA film and TV strike, but now it is the sole focus of the current strike the SAG-AFTRA is under right now over the Interactive Media Agreement, aka video games. So why don't you just get people up to speed on what is going on with that video game strike and how that plays a part in the core tenets of AI protections for actors that SAG-AFTRA is fighting for?
Sure, and I should start by saying I'm a replacement for Duncan Crabtree Island, who is my boss, and I appreciate TheWrap for not getting a digital replica of Duncan or a clone of Duncan to sit up here and do this interview and having a human do it instead. The concepts in the video game strike are the same as what we've been dealing with since basically the beginning of 2023 in all of our contracts, which we have successfully negotiated and will probably be negotiating for the foreseeable future. We have solved these issues being the protection of human performance in TV theatrical, in audiobooks contracts, in some of our broadcast contracts, in our sound recording code, in our animation agreement. So what we're saying to the video game companies are step up, do the same thing all these other industries and companies have done, and respect human creative performance, whether that's voice or that's physical performance. If you are bringing people in to perform, to animate the characters in your video game, you need those human performances. Don't then turn around and replicate those and use them across characters and across other video games without consent for each and every time you want to use that person's performance. That's as simple as I can put it.
And to use a very specific example that I think is particular to the Interactive Media Agreement is, motion capture, performance artists that, as I understand, when the strike started in July, and we had Sarah Molly, who is in the audience tonight, she is the negotiating chair for the IMA, and she mentioned that what the companies that are signers to the agreement were, we're talking about Activision, Disney, Warner Brothers, Formosa Group. Formosa does a lot of post-production on games like League of Legends. What they were offering for performance capture was, okay, we'll give you AI protections, like guarantee consent and compensation for motion capture work if the work is specifically for a character that resembles the motion capture performer. I don't think any of the performance capture artists are going to be looking like Kratos from God of War. They play all sorts of people. So we just talk a little bit about that, how it's so limiting and leaves the vast majority of AI, of motion capture jobs unprotected from AI replication.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little cynical. I think they know better. What I think they probably did was try to build on what we did in other contracts where recognizability is important and is useful, in addition to some of the state laws and federal laws that deal with the concept of recognizability. In video games, it doesn't work that way. So, my guess is they were trying to be clever. They thought they might be able to solve this by introducing concepts that we were used to, but we know how video games work. We know the recognizability standard is not going to work for video games. So that's the next step in these negotiations, is for them to get past that, in my view, absurdity, and deal with the reality of making video games and what human performers need.
Now, the labor actions and the contracts are only a part of the fight for AI protections for actors. The other big part, of course, is legislation. Now, recently, Governor Gavin Newsom came down to the SAG-AFTRA headquarters to sign a pair of laws regarding AI. And okay, just to explain a little bit about what they are and what they provide, and because you're trying to build a larger network, federal, state, contract, all sorts of protections, a whole web of protections. How do these laws add to that?
Yeah, and that's a good way to describe it. It's a web of protections. None of these are the silver bullet that's going to solve the problems that we're going to have to deal with when it comes to digital replication or synthetic content. But we recognized right away that there were some areas where we might make some quick gains in the digital replica problem. 2602 deals with the licensing of digital replicas. There's nothing in the law now that prohibits a company from using, say, a term of service or some boilerplate name, image, voice, and likeness contract to obtain the rights to your name, image, voice, and likeness, including, and you're seeing this in contracts now, replication or simulation of your voice and likeness in perpetuity in all mediums now and forever. So we thought, well, one thing we could probably do is make sure companies can never do that again. And we mirrored what we accomplished in the film and TV agreement, a sort of informed consent concept where you have to have a description of the use. If you're going to agree to license your replica, a clone of you, a clone of your voice or likeness, if you're going to agree to that, there has to be a description of the use. You have to know what you're getting into. It's kind of like when you fill out a medical form. You need to know exactly what's coming your way before you agree to it.
And pardon me, that was a big part of the negotiations for what ended the film and TV contract strike last year, right?
Yes, yes. So we built on that. So basically that concept that we accomplished in collective bargaining now applies to everybody in the state of California, whether you're working under one of our contracts or you're not. And then 1836 is really interesting, and there's a lot of history to 1836. 1836 was our response to the fact that now, today, California postmortem right of publicity, which is code section 3344.1, has exemptions, express exemptions for use in film, TV, audiovisual works, musical compositions. Obviously, that law was written prior to the time anybody thought there was going to be digital cloning. The digital cloning of voice and likeness was going to be a thing. And I believe it was a compromise back then between the studios and the performers unions who desperately wanted to create a postmortem right to protect against commercial misappropriation of name, image, voice, and likeness. So the studio said, we'll let you have that, but we want all these exemptions. And for about 10 years now, ever since the video game cases where athletes were used as avatars in video games and sued and said, we don't care that you're a First Amendment expressive work, video games, which they are, we have a right that you have to balance against the First Amendment. And ever since that case, we knew we were going to have to go to California and get rid of those exemptions. In a world of digital cloning, those exemptions are a disaster. So we did. If you look at the bill, all of those express exemptions when it comes to digital replication are gone, and they're replaced by sort of traditional First Amendment concepts like commentary and criticism and satire. And I should note that when it comes to balancing an intellectual property right, whether it's voice and likeness, and we're trying to create that at the federal level too, or say copyright, you have to balance that right with the First Amendment. And there's decades of case law that say a lot of things that a lot of us probably don't like are protected by the First Amendment. If people want to talk smack about you using a digital replica, they can do that. The First Amendment allows it. We don't like that, but if we want to get these bills passed and have them hold up to constitutional scrutiny, we have to accept the fact that there's got to be a balance between establishing the right and allowing the First Amendment protected speech.
Now, we also understand in the state laws there's also a widespread protection about you cannot use replications of a deceased performer without express written consent of the state, which seems to me like a big development because it's one thing if we're talking about somebody like the late, great James Earl Jones, who very clearly is going to have a very powerful estate to be able to protect his family, protect his work well after he's gone. But not everybody in SAG-AFTRA is going to have those kinds of resources. Can you just talk a little bit about how important it was to make sure that you didn't have to be a big legendary A-lister to be able to have that protections now and well into the future?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, James Earl Jones is a great example. Without the change to the law, you would have been able to use his voice as Darth Vader without getting consent from his estate or his family. Which would have been criminal, in my view. Example of how laws can sometimes evolve, make sense at the time, and then not make any sense because technology has changed and changed the way that people can sort of exploit. So that is, James Earl Jones is a great example. We were worried. I will say this. We've been thinking about name, image, voice, and likeness since it was 2012, 2013 video game cases when avatars were used, because we saw the avatars and we thought, these are going to get better and better. I didn't necessarily know GAI was coming, but I knew avatars were going to get better. And I knew we needed to have stronger voice and likeness laws. And then came deepfakes. And in 2018, we actually had a SAG-AFTRA magazine with deepfakes on the cover. We were trying to talk about deepfakes. We weren't getting a lot of traction because people weren't that aware. When they thought of deepfakes, they thought of maybe the Tom Cruise example that I'm sure you've all seen a million times. That's one of the first examples. But also like deepfake pornography. Nobody wanted to deal with it. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Ever since ChatGPT, and ever since the sort of high-profile examples of voice cloning, we've gotten everybody's attention. We've been able to do things like AB 2602, AB 1836. We wanted to do that a long time ago. We could not get anybody to understand really what we were talking about. So we're optimistic that we now have everybody's attention. Everybody understands what this technology can do, the good and the bad of it, and we're hopeful that we can keep sort of regulating and bargaining protections. Probably as new versions of it evolve over the years, we'll be doing this for the foreseeable future, I'm sure.
Now, you also mentioned before we came out here about this big timeline that you keep track of, and this goes back to when ChatGPT was introduced back in November 2022. Is that correct?
Yes.
He's got it on his phone, and this is, I understand that this is something that's really helped you guide how you talk with legislators, with anybody who may not be as familiar with the development of this software, and it helps when trying to craft these protections.
Yeah, I had a project. I wanted to sort of look back and see what we have done in the context of what needs to be accomplished in the future. None of this is, like I said, a silver bullet. None of this solves the problem. All of these are sort of mitigating factors for all of the things that are going to be problems for the entertainment and media industry and for our members who use their voice and likeness to make a living. But the timeline is interesting, and I will note this as well. I have a 7-month-old baby, so I don't know what's been more challenging, AI or 7-month-old baby. November 22, so almost 2 years ago, is when ChatGPT was released. I think that gave a lot of people their first interaction with what generative AI is, what it does. It can generate written, in this case, written content, and of course you had all the visual versions, Mid-Journeys of the world. And then maybe more sort of importantly was in March or April of 2023, you had the fake Drake, fake Weekend song, Heart on My Sleeve. If you weren't a huge fan of Drake and the Weeknd, and maybe even if you were, and you heard that song, you probably thought it was them. I can tell you that kickstarted almost everything that we've done since. In March of 2023, we helped co-found the Human Artistry Campaign. Any of you that are interested in getting on the side of human creative talent, I encourage you to go to that website. It's got about 250 entities that are part of that, all arts, creative talent advocacy groups. They initially started out as sort of a copyright protection group, and we said you need to include voice and likeness. Voice and likeness need to be separate, protected things, and you need to include those in your core principles. We put out a statement in April of 2023 or March of 2023 that said, employers, we understand that you might be interested in using digital replicate technology. Please understand if you want to use that, you need to talk to us first. Don't go trying to do that without talking to us. And we clarified that our Rule 1, which doesn't allow members to work on contracts that are not covered by SAG-AFTRA, includes not just working, but licensing your replica to do the work. That was all done in March or April. And then we started, it looks like in June, we started drafting the No Fakes Act. We did that with the record labels. We did that with the studios. We did that with artist advocacy groups. That started in June of 2023. In August, we started drafting what became AB 1836 and AB 2602. In October a discussion draft of the No Fakes Act was introduced in the Senate. They did that on purpose because they knew it was going to be controversial. The senators, by the way, that's who I'm referring to. It's a bipartisan group of senators. They said, let's introduce it, but not officially, because we know we're going to get a lot of people coming out of woodwork yelling and screaming about this, and let's start the work now to build consensus around it. So they introduced it as a discussion draft. In November of 2023, we resolved our strike with the film and TV studios over digital replicas, among other things. And then January 2024, the No AI Fraud Act is introduced in the House. That was the no fakes version for the House. It was significantly more aggressive, frankly, better for our purposes, not better for actually becoming law, because a lot of people were very angry about that bill, but it was introduced in the House. In January 2024, the Elvis Act was introduced in Tennessee, which is a really, really strong prohibition on the use of digital replicas in audiovisual works and sound recordings. It also allows you to go after systems, models, that are designed specifically for the purpose of cloning. You can actually go after the models. To give you an example of sort of a friendly jurisdiction, that bill was introduced in January in Tennessee. It was signed into law in March, because Tennessee is the music industry, and the music industry has a lot of leverage in Tennessee. They got that done. Very impressive. Like, that's what we wanted to do with the No Fakes Act, is just there's a lot more stakeholders. We ratified our animation agreement in March of 2024, building on what we did in film and TV with protection for digital replicas. In the animation agreement, we actually got away from that concept of recognizability, because obviously when people use their voice to animate a character, it's not always their voice. It's they're using their voice, but it doesn't sound like them when they're walking and talking down the street. Video games should take note of that. We ratified the sound recording code in April of 2024. That also includes prohibitions on the use of digital replicas of voice unless you get informed consent each and every time you might want to use that person's voice. That was incredible. We've never done anything like that with the record labels, at least not in a long time. In July of 2024, Illinois passed a version of AB 2602. Illinois literally called us and said, we like what you're doing in California with 2602. Could we have that language? We're like, yeah, here. And they did it. They got it done faster than California. The No Fakes Act was officially introduced in the Senate as an official draft in July 2024. That is the final piece of sausage making that you will see that includes interest from multiple stakeholders across multiple industries, including tech. In September, there was a House version of the No Fakes Act, so they dropped the No AI Frauds Act because they knew that wasn't going anywhere. And they just replaced it with the No Fakes Act because that thing actually has a chance. That thing might get done. And I'm probably biased, but for me that would be as big as like the Copyright Act of 1790. That is a federal intellectual property right in voice and likeness. And our union is, if you look at our website, we represent the faces and voices that entertain and inform the world. So how about a federal intellectual property right for those faces and those voices?
So this long timeline here, it just shows how it's a multi-front fight, requires a lot of Zoom talks, requires a lot of frequent flyer miles going back and forth across the country. And I imagine right now with the election going on, there's probably not a lot of interest in tackling something this complex and a lot of uncharted territory. But in 2025, there probably most certainly will. And I want to touch on something about the No Fakes Act that was brought up in an earlier panel by Justine Bateman, which was about the loopholes for the First Amendment protections. And there are things like, satire, commentary, but then she also mentioned there are things for footage for sports or documentaries, and she was talking about how you need that to be true. You need that to be true. I just wanted to talk with you about what conversations have you had so far about the First Amendment protections in the No Fakes Act as it is right now, and do you think there is some ways to seal up those loopholes when it comes to things like sports and documentaries, things like that?
Yeah, I mean, the conversations around the First Amendment have been exhaustive, never-ending. You can imagine where we fall on the spectrum. If you go look back at the No AI Fraud Act in the House. That's more along the lines of what we would prefer if we could write a bill and there weren't any other stakeholders that we had to worry about. But you've got massive First Amendment interests, and you've got decades and decades of case law dealing with the First Amendment and balancing it with IP rights. And that language was a huge compromise among broadcasters, studios, record labels, First Amendment scholars, artist advocacy groups, obviously the unions. We sort of started from the proposition, well, the First Amendment is the First Amendment, right? It's there. Why do we need to put it in the bill, right? You would think it's that simple. It's not that simple when it comes to First Amendment groups. And so it is an imperfect compromise to accomplish a goal that I feel is urgent and that we need to accomplish that goal. So am I willing to live with language like news accounts, commentary, criticism, historical uses? I am willing to live with those if I get an intellectual property right and voice and likeness that, probably most importantly, allows you to take stuff down off of platforms. That is what you can't do now. State IP law, except in maybe one or two jurisdictions, other jurisdictions like California have said state IP law cannot be used. The platforms have a Communications Decency Act, Section 230, shield of liability that blocks you from being able to use state IP law to take stuff down, at least in the Ninth Circuit. The No Fakes Act would allow you to take stuff off of platforms, which is what most people want. If you are being sexually harassed via deep fakes, if your performance is being replaced, if you are being involved in commercial misappropriation, that bill allows you to provide notice and take down. And they built on what was established in the DMCA back in 1998 and improved upon that, because as anyone that's in the content business knows, that is by far not as strong as it could be. This is better. It requires faster takedowns. It doesn't allow them to put things back up. The damages are astronomical if you don't take it down. So in my view, when we talked about this, it's urgent. It's urgent that we get this done. I don't want to have to wait until the end of 2025. I want to get it done by the end of 2024. It's going to be tough, but we have meetings almost every day with the House and the Senate, as busy as they are. I should note that I meet with the lawyers, right? So they're busy, but they're not as busy as their bosses who are out there doing whatever they're doing and campaigning and whatnot. We talk to the lawyers, and we get the lawyers to understand what's going on here and what we need. And, if anybody's interested, get involved. We are going to push hard to see if it can get into some year-end AI-related bill.
Now, along with the No Fakes Act, along with resolving the interactive media agreement, along with any other legislation that you've got up there, you've also next year got the commercials contract. And with commercials and AI, I imagine it's even more urgent for actors. They just put out that OpenAI Sora Toys R Us commercial, and there's probably gonna be a lot more coming that way, because with commercials, there's a lot less, push on the artistry the way there would be with film and television. What do you anticipate in terms of the commercial contracts? What are going to be the really big sticking points, do you think, on how that is going to be resolved?
The same sticking points we've dealt with for the last 2 years, and that's protecting human performance. I remember when that Toys R Us ad came out, and we've had conversations with OpenAI, and I've certainly heard a lot of these AI companies talk, and they like to talk about the sort of promise of AI to deliver scientific breakthroughs, medical breakthroughs, solve climate change, right? And I hear that, and I think that's fantastic, and I don't doubt that some of that might be coming. Why are you making a Toys R Us ad? Why are you spending $100 billion to build a machine to make a Toys R Us ad? I don't understand. I'm hopeful that consumers maybe agree with me that they don't want to see all their content be synthetic. One of the things that we're probably going to look to push in 2025, as we wait to see the outcome of these copyright cases, the New York Times and Getty Images, the people that are suing the systems for training on their copyrighted material. As we wait to see those outcomes, we're looking to build into the law things like transparency, things like disclaimers. People at least should know if they're dealing with something that's fake, right? They should at least know. And I don't know how many of you are on social media regularly, but I have to imagine you're starting to see a little bit more and a little bit more fake stuff. And, right? Like, it's amazing how fast it's just creeping onto the platform. I'm actually hopeful that people get so inundated with that on these platforms that they start to just, grow distasteful of the whole concept of being inundated. First, you're inundated with ads. We've all managed to live with that, I guess. But now it's going to be synthetic, fake stuff, not made by humans, nothing you can go look into to say, oh, who made that? Who's the human artist that did that? I'd like to know more about that person. Think about your favorite song or your favorite book or your favorite movie and who directed it and who the actors were. You probably look that stuff. I do. It's interesting to me. Synthetic stuff is not that interesting to me. So I'm hopeful they overdo it and they just shoot themselves in the foot and they can go solve world problems and stop dumping synthetic stuff like fake Toys R Us ads on us. Don't need it. Thanks. Don't need it. No offense to any companies out there that are doing it.
With the last couple of minutes we have left, let's just to go back on what you said about the urgency of this, how you want to get this done, because even after all of these laws get passed, they got to be enforced. There's got to be a system to enforce those laws, and already now we're seeing, especially in the voice acting space, we're seeing AI coming up more and more and more and more. I was doing for a recent story, seeing how there are companies that are using AI for dubbing. Like there's a Portuguese show on Hulu where the English dub is entirely done by AI, and you wouldn't know it unless you saw at the very end of the credits, which you usually click out of, it says dubbing done by Deep Dub AI. And that is one form of it. There's also much more unethical things like commercial misappropriation, things like using Scarlett Johansson's voice in a commercial without her consent, things like that. Are we in a situation right now where the longer it takes to build this network of protections, the harder it is to rein in all this unethical stuff because it is spreading?
Yes. When I heard Fake Drake, Fake Weekend, the first thought I had was Napster. Napster decimated the music industry for a very long time. From Napster to Spotify, that was not a good period of time for the music industry. I don't want to repeat the mistakes of that. I want to get a handle on this immediately. That's why we need things like No Fakes Act. Take stuff down immediately. Get it down immediately. Disclaimers. People should know who they're dealing with, what they're dealing with. We're ready to vigorously enforce the contract terms that we've bargained. I'm looking forward to that very much. I can't imagine an arbitrator's not going to side with us when our position is they just deep fake this person without consent. Good luck defending that case. So there's going to be a lot of work that still needs to be done, but I have to caveat that with copyright infringement, digital theft of copyright. Do we solve that? No. Do we mitigate that? Do we make it manageable? Yes. We're going to probably be faced with the same thing when it comes to digital replication of voice and likeness. There's going to be misappropriation. We need technological solutions, legal solutions, collective bargaining solutions. We are talking to technological companies that are very, very good at scrubbing the internet for unauthorized uses of face, voice, likeness. We are probably going to start talking to them more because that, as far as I'm concerned, that's fighting fire with fire. Like, don't rely on the law. Go get it. Go get it yourself.
Well, the race is definitely on. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you joining us here at the Grill.
Thank you.